The rain was falling softly against the old glass windows, a steady rhythm that made the whole house feel half asleep. I had just rolled up my sleeves, ready to clean, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Kendra Miles, the young woman I'd hired to help tidy up while I was out. I smiled as I answered, expecting her cheerful voice. But what I heard wasn't cheer. It was trembling, breathless fear. "Mrs. Caldwell," she whispered. "Is there anyone else in the house?" I frowned. "No, dear." "Why do you ask?" There was silence. Then, just above a whisper, she said the words that froze my blood. "There's a woman upstairs." My heart stopped. "What did you just say?" "She's wearing a white dress," Kendra breathed. "Long hair." She just walked into the last room at the end of the hall. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The second floor, no one had set foot there in years. "Kendra, listen to me," I said, my voice shaking. "Get out, right now." A door creaked through the line. Footsteps, then silence, and then nothing. The call ended, and all I could hear was the storm breaking outside, thunder rolling over Savannah as if the sky itself knew. Whatever was hiding in that house had just been awakened. The rain hammered against the old windows of the Caldwell house like restless fingers, impatient and cold. Outside, the streets of Savannah glistened with the reflection of streetlights, turning every puddle into a restless mirror. Inside, silence stretched, heavy, domestic, deceptive. I had left that morning believing everything in my world was perfectly ordinary. I had folded the kitchen towels, lined up the silver spoons, and told myself I'd finally deep clean the place before the humidity returned. I had no reason to think that by nightfall, every certainty in my life would fracture like thin glass. It began with a phone call. "Kendra Miles," flashed on my screen, our young neighbor, a kind college student who'd been helping me around the house whenever I got too tired to climb the stairs. I smiled, expecting her usual breathless cheer, maybe a question about where to find the cleaning spray. But when I answered, what came through wasn't cheer, it was fear. A cold, trembling whisper. "Mrs. Caldwell," she breathed. "Is there anyone else in the house?" I frowned. "No, dear, just you. Why?" There was a pause. So long I thought the call had dropped. Then her voice returned, smaller this time, shaking like the last leaf in a storm. "There's someone upstairs." My blood ran cold. I gripped the edge of the counter to keep my knees from giving out. "What do you mean, someone?" "She's wearing a white dress," Kendra whispered. "Long hair." She walked into the last room at the end of the hallway. "I thought it was you at first, but..." She stopped. I heard her breathing fast, uneven. "Kendra, listen to me carefully," I said, trying to sound calm, though my own voice was shaking. "Get out of the house, right now. Do you hear me?" She didn't answer. The silence was worse than any scream. Then came the faint creak of a door, the hurried rhythm of footsteps on wood, and the click of the line going dead. I froze. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the storm outside and the pounding of my heart. Then instinct took over. I grabbed my car keys, ran into the rain, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. By the time I reached home, police lights painted the front porch blue and red. The officers were already inside, their flashlights sweeping across every corner of the house. Kendra sat on the front step, drenched in rain, her face pale, her hands wrapped around her knees like a frightened child. When she saw me, she burst into tears. "I swear, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice cracking. "I saw her. I saw her walk down the hall and disappear. I didn't imagine it." One of the officers, a man with gray at his temples, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we checked the entire house. No sign of anyone. Doors and windows are all locked. No forced entry." But even as he spoke, I felt something. A subtle wrongness in the air, the way the shadows seemed too deep, too watchful. Kendra looked at me helplessly. "She was real," she whispered. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But part of me, perhaps the part still clinging to logic, refused to let fear win. I thanked the officers, apologized for the trouble, and took Kendra's shaking hands in mine. "Go home, dear," I said softly. "Get some rest." When she left, I stood in the living room alone. The house was quiet again, too quiet. The kind of quiet that hums beneath the skin. I turned slowly, looking up the staircase that led to the second floor. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of it, the age of those steps, the faint scent of old wood and dust. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. That Kendra, poor thing, had imagined it. Maybe the light and rain had played tricks on her eyes. Then I heard it. A single creak, the sound of a floorboard shifting above me. I stared at the ceiling, heart hammering. It came again, soft, deliberate, like someone pacing. My throat went dry. "Thomas?" I called out, even though I knew my husband was still at his publisher's office in Atlanta. My voice trembled through the house, but no one answered. Only the echo of my own words came back to me, hollow and strange. I wanted to run outside, call the police again, do anything, but instead, I stood frozen, listening. The noise stopped, then a soft thud like something being set down. My breath caught. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned, waiting for the next sound. Nothing. When Thomas returned home that night, I told him everything. The phone call, the footsteps, the officer's report. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. "Maggie," he said gently, touching my arm, "you've been under too much stress. The house is old, sweetheart. Wood settles, air vents moan. Maybe Kendra saw her reflection in a mirror and panicked." I wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't that simple, but something in his tone made me stop. It was calm, too calm. The calm of someone who already knew the ending to a story I hadn't finished telling. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that creak above us, that slow, measured step, the sound of someone or something walking where no one should be. At one point, I thought I heard the faint scrape of furniture being moved. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I turned to Thomas. He was asleep, or pretending to be. His breathing was steady, untroubled. I stared into the darkness, and for the first time, I wondered if the woman Kendra had seen wasn't a stranger at all. If she was something, someone, I was never meant to find. The storm raged outside. The walls of the Caldwell house whispered with age, and I lay there in the dark, realizing that the real haunting hadn't started with the phone call. It had started long ago, quietly, invisibly, in the heart of the man sleeping beside me. The morning after the storm, the house felt wrong, not haunted, just off, like the air itself had learned to hold its breath. I woke to the faint hum of the city outside and the smell of coffee drifting through the hall. Thomas was already up, dressed in his usual crisp shirt, tie perfectly knotted. He was standing by the window, reading something on his tablet, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Morning," I said softly, brushing my hair back. He turned, startled. Too startled for a man just checking his email. "Morning, Maggie. You slept?" "I tried," I said, pouring myself a cup. "Hard to, after last night." He didn't look at me. "Right. The woman in white? You know how old houses are. Every shadow looks alive when it rains." I wanted to believe him. God, I did. But something about his tone, the way he said every shadow, felt rehearsed. "I called Kendra this morning," I said. "She's still shaken. She swears she saw someone." Thomas sighed and set his tablet down. "You're letting that girl get to you. I'll change the locks if it helps you sleep." "Would that help you?" I asked. He looked up, his eyes suddenly sharp. "Maggie, don't start. You've been anxious for weeks. Maybe it's work, maybe it's the weather, but this." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. "This paranoia isn't like you." I wanted to argue, but the words never made it out. Instead, I stared at him, the perfect husband, calm, reasonable, always in control. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was performing calmness, the way one rehearses for a role they've played too long. That day, Thomas left earlier than usual. "Conference call," he said, kissing my forehead before disappearing into the rain. But the moment the door closed, silence flooded the house again, not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses against your skin, makes you notice every tick of the clock, every hum of electricity. I stood in the hallway, staring up the stairs. The floorboards groaned softly, as if remembering footsteps. That was when I decided to stop pretending too. I spent the morning moving through the house with a quiet, deliberate focus, room by room, floor by floor. The rain outside had softened to a mist, filtering through the curtains like ghostlight. Nothing looked out of place, except for the small white handprint on the upstairs hallway window. Too small to be Thomas's, too perfect to be accidental. I pressed my own hand against it. Cold. Smooth. The print was on the inside. Downstairs, I heard the faint scrape of wood. My pulse quickened. I turned sharply, only to see the kitchen door swinging open. Draft from the chimney. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I closed it and forced a laugh that didn't sound like mine. "Get it together, Maggie." But as I walked past Thomas's study, I noticed the door slightly ajar. He always kept it locked. Always. Even after 12 years of marriage, that room had been his sanctum, where contracts were signed, deals made, and, I assumed, secrets kept. Today, though, the lock was unlatched. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. The scent of cedar and paper filled the air. Everything was meticulously arranged, shelves lined with legal binders, a globe on the desk, pens aligned like soldiers. But on the far end, something was off. The bottom drawer of the cabinet wasn't fully closed. I knelt and pulled it open. Inside, beneath a stack of folders, was a small black leather notebook. Aged, worn, the corners curling from years of handling. No title, no initials. My hands trembled as I flipped it open. The handwriting wasn't Thomas's. The first page read, April 6th. She's starting to ask questions. I have to be careful now. The lies are working, but not for long. My stomach dropped. I flipped another page. She heard something last night. I told her it was the wind. I don't know if she believed me. The ink was smudged, as if written in haste. Page after page, observations, small notes, dates, all recent. She looked at me differently today. I think she knows. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room tilted. My fingers went numb. Who was she? And if it was me, then who'd written this? The handwriting wasn't Thomas's. It was sharper, more angular, like someone trying to mimic neatness but failing. I turned another page and froze. A small photograph slipped out and landed on the carpet. It was our living room, taken from the outside window. At night. I felt my knees weaken. My throat went dry. Someone had been watching us. I picked up the photo with shaking hands, noticing a faint reflection in the glass. Someone standing behind the camera, their face blurred, only a faint silhouette visible in the rain. And beneath it, in neat, chilling handwriting, she sleeps on the left. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug. The notebook fell open to the last page. If she finds this, it's already too late. I heard something then. A sound, soft, slow, above me, footsteps, deliberate, heavy, coming from the attic. My breath hitched. The attic, no one had been up there in years, not since before Thomas bought the house. I forced myself to move, one step at a time, my heart hammering so loudly it drowned out everything else. The staircase creaked under my weight, and each sound felt too loud, too intrusive. Halfway up, I heard it again, something shifting. A shadow passed across the narrow strip of light spilling through the attic door. I stopped at the top and stared. The door was open just a few inches, enough to let the faint smell of dust and old wood seep through. "Thomas?" I whispered. Nothing. The silence answered, thick and waiting. I pushed the door wider. The attic was dim, lit only by the pale light filtering through a small window. Sheets covered old furniture, boxes stacked high like forgotten tombstones, and then, movement, something in the corner, a flicker. I froze. "Who's there?" No reply. Just a faint rustle. I stepped closer, each breath visible in the cold air. My hand trembled as I reached for the cloth draped over a tall shape by the far wall. I gripped the edge and pulled. Beneath the sheet stood a full-length mirror, old, cracked at the corner. And in the reflection, behind me stood a woman in white. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing, just dust and empty air. But when I looked back at the mirror, her reflection remained, pale, still, watching. I stumbled backward, crashing into a box. Papers spilled across the floor, letters, photographs, invoices, and among them, one envelope caught my eye. My name written in familiar, precise handwriting, Maggie. I tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper. "If you're reading this, you've gone too far. Leave the house tonight. Don't look for me. Don't trust anyone." No signature, but I knew that handwriting, Thomas. My vision blurred. The floor felt like it was tilting, spinning. My knees gave out and I dropped the letter. The mirror cracked further, a thin line slicing through the woman's face. From somewhere below, the sound of a door closing echoed through the house. Someone was here. Not a ghost. Not a memory. Someone alive. I didn't run. I couldn't. Every step I took was measured, deliberate, silent. The stairs creaked like old bones. I reached the hallway, clutching the banister. The front door was closed, locked. The air was colder now, heavier. I heard it again, a faint, rhythmic sound. Breathing. It was coming from the study. I turned slowly toward the half-open door. Inside, the lamp on the desk was still on, casting long shadows across the floor. The notebook was gone. My pulse roared in my ears. Then, from behind the desk, something moved. A hand. slowly rising, pale fingers curling around the edge. I didn't scream. I just stared as a figure straightened, face hidden behind the shadows. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then, in a voice low and steady, a man whispered, "Hello, Maggie." The study smelled like cedar and rain-soaked paper. The man's voice, low, steady, seemed to soak into the wood, the carpet, my skin. "Hello, Maggie?" For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. The lamp cast a soft circle of light that didn't reach his face. I could make out the line of his jaw, the slope of his shoulders, the damp cling of a coat darkened by mist. The shape of him felt wrong and right at once, like a melody I should have known by heart but hadn't heard in years. "Thomas?" I said, but it came out as something else. A plea, a warning. He stepped forward and the light touched him. The world lurched. It was Thomas, and it wasn't. The eyes were the same blue-gray that used to watch me over morning coffee, the same small scar under his left eyebrow from a bicycle fall at 16, the same crooked tooth he never fixed because he said imperfection gave a face its soul. But his face carried months, no years, of weather I didn't recognize. Stubble dusted his jaw. Fine lines etched the corners of his eyes like cracks in winter glass. He looked thinner, harder, realer. He looked like a man who had not slept under my roof in a very long time. He watched me watching him, and something in his gaze folded, like pain pressed flat. "It's me," he said, as if that settled all debts. "It's really me." My throat tightened. "Then who?" I couldn't finish, because if this was Thomas, then the man who had kissed my forehead this morning, who tucked his shirt just so and smiled like we were fine, was... "He's not me," Thomas said quietly. "And he never was." The room tilted. I reached for the edge of the desk, fingers skating across the cool wood. My chest was tight, like string pulled too fast around a box. The lamplight hummed. Beyond the drawn curtains, the rain had thinned to a silver hush, the city holding its breath. "You vanished," I whispered. The accusation tasted like rust. "You went to Atlanta. You said you needed a change of scenery. You left me here and you—" "I never made it to Atlanta." His jaw flexed. "I made it as far as the station. Then I saw him, outside the ticket hall. He watched me the way hunters watch deer, patient, certain. I turned toward the street to lose him. I don't remember the hit, just the smell of bleach and the inside of a trunk. When I woke up, I was somewhere that smelled like mold and metal. A room with a drain in the floor. He took my wallet, my ID, every story I'd ever told you, and wore them like a suit." I stared at him, the edges of his words cutting into me. "How long?" "Long enough to make me doubt days." He swallowed. "Weeks, maybe more. They fed me just enough not to die, kept a light on like noon that never moved, the kind of place time goes to drown." My mind threw up memories like photographs shaken from a box. The way Thomas had smiled too quickly, how he'd started sugar in his coffee after a decade of black, how he laughed at the wrong moment during an old movie, how he closed his office door more often, how he said every shadow looks alive when it rains. I felt sick. "Why come now?" I asked. "Why not the police or—" "I tried." His voice was a rasp. "He has people, not many, enough. He followed the book, every call a risk, every appearance calculated. He needed you calm, needed this house steady, needed time upstairs." A cold shiver prickled down my spine. "The attic." "He's been living here," I said. It wasn't a question. He promised me new locks. He told me I was paranoid. God, my hand flew to my mouth. "He told me not to let anyone in, especially your editor." Thomas's eyes lifted, wet with something that wasn't rain. "Callahan, he wouldn't let him close. He couldn't risk anyone who could read the seams in the mask." My knees threatened to give. I sat on the edge of the chair, the study's warm light suddenly an interrogation lamp in a room with no door. I thought of the black leather notebook in my lap earlier, the handwriting that wasn't Thomas's. "She sleeps on the left. If she finds this, it's already too late." The photograph taken through the living room window, the face blurred by rain. The letters that watched me from inside my name. "He's still here," I said, barely a breath. The house heard me. The old wood shifted, the air sank closer. Somewhere, a pipe exhaled. I heard the downstairs door. I heard. Thomas lifted a finger. "Listen, we did." The house answered with silence too loud to be empty. The mirror upstairs flashed across my mind. The crack, the pale figure behind me that stayed when I turned. I felt her again, that white dress like a captured moon. "Who is she?" I whispered, not sure if I meant the woman Kendra had seen, the one in the mirror, or the version of me who thought she knew her husband. Thomas's gaze slid to the ceiling. Not in fear exactly, in recognition. Like a man listening to a song he used to hum and swore he'd forgotten. Maggie, he said, and my name inside his voice made me ache. There's something about this house I never told you. Try me. He moved closer, and for a second the light split his face into two, the man I married and the stranger who'd been living in his shape. Before I met you, before the book deals, before Savannah, he said. I worked a year in Charleston with a man who collected stories no one printed. When I bought this house, he called me. He said, be careful, the old places remember how to keep secrets. Some will keep one for you if you ask. Some will keep you if you don't. I laughed then. But the first week we moved in, I found something in the attic, under the boards. A lock of hair wrapped in muslin. A photograph of a woman standing by the window where the paint never quite dries. On the back, she watches the ones who hide. The room cooled. Goose flesh rose along my forearms. Thomas. He shook his head as if clearing fog. I don't think she's a ghost, Maggie. I think she's something old. A way the house remembers women who were asked to vanish. It keeps them. In glass. In drafts that smell like pennies. In the way mirrors catch what rooms deny. The sentence put a splinter beneath my rib. Women asked to vanish. The attic. The letter with my name. The notebook that didn't belong to us. From the hallway a floorboard sighed. Thomas's eyes flicked to the study door. He gestured toward the lamp. I turned it off. The room slid into half-dark, the soft blue of stormlight shaping the shelves like cliffs. We stood in that breathless blue and let our hearing sharpen. Soft steps, bare. The small pause between each one, measured, patient. They stopped outside the study. I tasted metal. A shadow crossed the slice of light at the threshold. Someone stood there, listening back at us. Thomas moved silently to the bookshelf, pressed his palm to a vertical seam, and slid free a narrow panel. A safe's dial glinted. He spun it with practiced fingers, cracked it open, and removed a short, heavy flashlight, metal, ugly, meant for hitting as much as for light. I stared. Since when do we have? Since before you knew we needed it. He handed it to me. I didn't want to take it. I took it anyway. The shadow shifted. A breath, his. The smell came with it then. Bleach and cologne, and something chemical that burned the back of my throat. The trunk Thomas had mentioned. The room with a drain. The knob turned once, stopped, turned again. Thomas crossed the room, his footsteps silent on the rug, and opened the door before the stranger could. The hallway gaped like a mouth. The man on the other side smiled without showing teeth. In this light, I could see the shape of familiarity, roughed over by mimicry. The haircut, the coat like Thomas's, the way he held his shoulders bought and paid for from our wedding photographs. He looked past Thomas to me and his eyes warmed, practiced, perfect. There you are, he said softly. I was starting to worry. If my voice had been a knife, I would have thrown it. Get out of my house. He tilted his head. Our house, darling. Thomas stepped between us. The movement was small and absolute. It ends now, he said. The man's gaze slid over him like water finding an old groove in stone. That depends, he said, on which story you're telling, Mr. Caldwell. Thomas didn't rise to it. He held the man's eyes the way men check an animal for the twitch that means run. Leave, he said again, lower. The man sighed as if the request inconvenienced his evening. You can't call the police, he said mildly. Not without showing them the upstairs. Cold slid inside my bones. Upstairs? He looked at me then with pity. No, with something far worse, possession. Poor Maggie, you really have been living downstairs, haven't you? Thomas moved first. He pushed the door wide, reached, grabbed a fistful of coat, and drove the man back into the hallway. The sound of their bodies hitting the wall shuddered through the plaster. They struggled in that crooked light, a tangle of breath and elbows and rage, and for a second I saw in both their faces the same thing, a determination born somewhere colder than fear. The flashlight was heavy in my hand. Don't. The impostor choked, his voice fragmenting with pressure. She'll hear you. The house listened. The house breathed. From above us a single, delicate footstep answered, then another. Moving. Not frantic, curious, like someone forgotten deciding finally to see who had come to visit. Maggie, Thomas gritted, go to the kitchen. Call Callahan. Tell him to come with 2 men and no cars on the street. Don't. the imposter hissed. "Callahan knows the book business, not this, not what feeds it." "What does that mean?" I demanded. He smiled, bruised now, lips wet, eyes bright with the high of danger. "You'll see." I took a step toward the stairs before I realized I'd moved. Drawn, not by him, not by Thomas, by the sound above, the house's spine, the woman in the mirror I'd brought with me in my eyes. Thomas saw it, and his voice softened in that way that used to unmake me. "Maggie," he said, "stay with me." But the air above had shifted, thinner, taut like a wire. Something waited that had been waiting the whole time we'd called this place home. A draft slipped down the stairwell carrying notes I couldn't name. Paper, lavender left too long in a drawer, the skin salt of someone who didn't see the sun. It was intimate and terrible. It was human. "I'm not running anymore," I said. But I didn't know if I meant from the man or from the truth. On the landing, the attic door stood ajar again. How did I ever believe it stayed shut? A slender light spread from within, the color of old photographs. In it, dust turned to snow. The imposter wrenched free with a violence that surprised me and bolted up the stairs. Thomas lunged after him, grabbed his ankle, missed, then sprinted. I followed, breath burning, the metal flashlight slick in my palm. The steps complained under our weight. The house did not. It seemed to lean toward us, like a church eager for confession. We reached the landing together, 3 bodies, 1 story, pulling in different directions. The imposter pushed through the attic door. Thomas hit him hard from behind. They spilled into the dim, their shapes carving the light. I staggered after and stopped dead. The attic was not as I'd left it. The sheets still shrouded old furniture. The window still kept its small square of rain, but the center of the room had changed. Someone had made a life there. A low cot with a blanket folded with care. A metal basin. A stack of notebooks with their corners kissed down to soft leather. A plate still wet from recent washing. And a mirror. The same full-length mirror, moved, angled now to hold the doorway and anyone who entered in its narrow throat. In it I saw all 3 of us, and behind us in the far corner something else, white as the edge of a breath. I turned. The corner was empty. In the mirror, the white figure did not move. The imposter smiled, panting. "You see her, don't you?" he said. "The house shows her to wives first." "Who is she?" I breathed. "The one who kept me alive," he said, eyes shining. "The one who told me your husband would come back. The one who whispered the recipes and the lock combinations and where he keeps the extra key behind the 3rd brick to the left of the back steps. The one who writes better than both of us." Thomas looked stricken in a way I'd never seen. "Don't listen," he said to me, and maybe to himself. "He's a parasite. He feeds on need. The imposter lunged for the stack of notebooks. Thomas grabbed his wrist and slammed it to the floor. The sound cracked like a shot. The mirror shivered, the white figure rippling like a candle in wind. And then, for the first time, her head turned. Not toward the men, toward me. I couldn't move. I felt as if every year of my marriage had braided into a rope tied tight around my chest. The woman's face was pale and strange, not young and not old, the features blunted by the glass, by time. She lifted a hand and laid it against the inside of the mirror as if greeting me across a lake. "Maggie!" Thomas shouted. The imposter twisted, kicked him off, and dove for the notebooks. He snatched the top one, held it aloft, and laughed. A small, delighted sound that made my skin crawl. "You should have read more carefully," he said to me, and flicked the book open to the middle. A page fluttered like a trapped bird. On it, in that angular hand I didn't know, ran a sentence that froze the room. "If she learns what was kept, she will never leave this house." Thomas surged to his feet, fury and terror breaking through his practiced control. He drove the imposter into the stacked trunks, and both men went down in a thunder of old wood and dust. The notebooks spilled, pages skidding like leaves. The metal flashlight in my hand felt suddenly heavier, as if the house wanted me to choose which story would be true when the police asked. I stepped forward and the boards answered with a hollow thud. Not here. Not there. Beneath. I knelt, breath shaking, and pressed my palm to the floor. Cool. Grain fine as old skin. The hollow sound came again when I rapped it. Soft, round, a void, a compartment. "Maggie, don't," Thomas said, not looking at me, straining to hold the other man's wrists. But my fingers were already under the seam, lifting. The plank gave with a sigh like relief. Inside the dark cavity lay a wooden box, small and careful, its lid tied with faded ribbon the color of tea. A lock of hair rested atop it in muslin, and beneath that another notebook, older, edges furred with time. The mirror brightened. The woman in white lifted her hand from the glass and laid 2 fingers against her lips, hush, and then pointed to the box. My pulse roared in my ears. I pulled the box free and slid the lid aside. Inside lay a pile of letters bound in a lace of yellowed thread. On the top, in familiar, precise handwriting that turned my stomach, my name, Maggie. I looked up. The men had stilled, breathless, both staring at me, not each other. In the mirror, the woman's face was a white coin in deep water. The house leaned in close enough for me to smell the past. I untied the thread. The first letter opened like a wound. If you're reading this, then the house has decided it's time you knew what it kept from me, and what I asked it to keep from you. Footsteps sounded on the stairs below, more than one set, slow and careful, a cadence I recognized from 1,000 polite knocks. The police? Callahan? Or someone else called by a different kind of law? The imposter's smile went thin. You shouldn't have opened that, he said. Thomas's voice broke. Maggie, don't read. Not now. The lamp on the far crate flickered, brightened, and the mirror's crack widened with a sound like ice surrendering to spring. The woman's face fractured into 2 and then held. I looked from the letter to the men I had to choose between, to the woman who might be an old story the house told through me, and I made the only move that felt like mine. I began to read. I read, if you're reading this, then the house has decided it's time you knew what it kept from me, and what I asked it to keep from you. I didn't build my name from nothing, Maggie. I built it from a door I never should have opened. The letters smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The ink bled where tears had fallen long ago, making some words ocean soft and others razor clear. The first week after we moved in, I found her notebook under the boards, with the lock of hair and the photograph. I thought it was a relic, a curiosity the house forgot to spit out. I put it back, but at night the attic lights hummed like a trapped bee. When I went up, there was handwriting on the glass of the mirror, not a reflection, handwriting, fog writing, like breath. Do not pretend you don't see me. My mouth went dry. The woman in the mirror stared through the crack as if it were a keyhole. Below, a boot sounded on the staircase, measured, official. 2 more behind it. Voices. A knock knocked politely against the day we were ending. I turned the page. She was already here when we arrived. Not a ghost. I don't know what to call her. A keeping? The house made a room for her in reflections. In the cool places, air doesn't move. I started leaving food and it was gone by morning. The words left behind were clean as water. They became sentences. The sentences became pages. Each page felt like a debt I was paying. Then I signed my first contract and the debt grew teeth. I looked at Thomas. He was watching me as if each sentence unspooled a rope around his throat. He didn't speak. The imposter smiled with his split lip and pressed his shoulder to the wall, catching his breath like a man who had run a marathon underwater. Go on, he said. Tell her what you asked the house to keep. The next page shook in my hands. I told myself I was protecting you. I told myself we needed a good start. I told myself I would pay her back when I learned how to write like that. I told myself 100 things men tell themselves when something holy appears and they decide to own it. I asked the house to keep her from you. My vision stung. The attic dipped and righted itself. In the mirror, the woman lifted her palm from the glass. The crack across her face widened, but she didn't flinch. The light in that thin square window felt older than the day. Downstairs, the voices grew nearer. Savannah PD, a baritone called. Careful, neighborly. Mr. Callahan, anyone home? The imposter's head tilted, listening not to the police but to the house. They don't hear her, he murmured. Not yet. I read the next page because I couldn't stop. I thought if I fed her work a while, I could lift us both into daylight. Then I would turn on the light and tell you everything. I told myself that day was always tomorrow. When tomorrow didn't come, I started locking the study. Then I started lying. Then I learned what my voice sounds like when it doesn't belong to me. The mirror began answering to your name. I felt something in me tilt, like a picture straightened after years of hanging crooked. How long? I asked, and the question pulled blood from both men. Too long, Thomas said. His voice was quiet, raw. I thought I could undo it before it reached you. I thought I could trade my confession for our peace and call it love. The imposter laughed once, no joy in it, only relief at being right. He thought he could bargain with a house, he said, and gestured with his chin to the mirror. But houses down here were built to outlive men's deals. Boots reached the landing outside the attic. "Mr. Caldwell?" a voice called. Callahan strained, worried, urgent now. "Maggie?" I turned the next letter. It was addressed to me by name on the outside, dated the year of Thomas's first bestseller. I promised myself this would be the last book with her blood in it. I told myself I would bring her into the world the way the world deserved to meet her. Under her name, in light. Then the call came. They wanted a series. They wanted a tour. They wanted me to speak into microphones and tell the story of my process while I went home and wiped fingerprints off of paper that didn't belong to me. I'm writing this because I love you the only way I have left. With the truth. I'm writing this because I think the house loves you more than it loves me. The room cooled. The woman in the mirror lowered her hand. She wasn't beautiful and she wasn't ugly. She was undeniable. Not a ghost. Not an angel. A fact no one had made room for. "Open the door," Callahan called from the threshold. The knob rattled gently, respectfully. "Thomas? Maggie? We're coming in." "We're here," I said, and my voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. "Upstairs." The imposter's jaw flexed. "You think they can walk into a story without sinking?" he said. "You think paper won't pull them down?" "Stop talking," Thomas told him, and there was a plea under the order that broke something in me and fixed something else. I dropped my gaze to the last letter. It was the shortest. "I can't forgive myself. Forgiveness is not mine to take, but I can give back what I stole. In the trunk under the mirror are the manuscripts with the edits in my hand. You'll see where I took her bones and bent them into mine. You'll see the places I told myself were collaboration. Publish them as they are, hers. The name she left in the first notebook is the only name that belongs on their covers." "Thomas, where?" I asked, already moving. My knees found the dust-silvered trunk before my hands did. The iron latches were stubborn, and then they weren't. The lid lifted with the sigh of old cedar and every year of my marriage. Inside lay stacks of paper bound with twine, corners softened by oil and time. The top page was dated in a careful, elegant hand I had never seen and would know in a crowd. "Elena Rivers, the attic light." The imposter exhaled like a man seeing shore. "There she is," he whispered, "the one who kept me alive." Callahan appeared in the doorway with 2 officers. He took in the toppled trunks, the dust-streaked floor, the 2 Thomases, and his face did 1,000 complicated things men in suits are trained not to let their faces do. "What am I looking at?" he asked, not to any of us in particular, and to all of us at once. I stood, the manuscript in my arms. "You're looking at the author," I said, and turned the title page so he could see the name, and the theft, and the place the truth has been sleeping. Callahan stepped into the room like a man stepping into a church he didn't know he believed in. His gaze flicked to the mirror. A muscle jumped in his jaw. "Is that?" "It's a mirror," I said. "It remembers what we ask it to." The imposter's smile thinned to a wound. "He's not the only one who asked," he said to me, and there was a kindness in it so cruel it felt like mercy. "When he disappeared, you asked it too. You asked it to keep you from knowing how far the house carries the voices of men who lie. It kept you. It's good at that." "Enough," Thomas said, and he moved faster than I'd seen him move since our wedding when it rained and we ran laughing under a stranger's porch. He drove the imposter back. The officers stepped in. One reached for cuffs. The other lifted his radio. "Wait," I said, and the room held. I went to the mirror. Up close, the crack drew a fine line between what I had been and what I could stand to be. The woman in white stood on the other side as if standing in a doorway too narrow for anything else to pass. She looked at me. Not pleading, not warning. Waiting. "I know your name now," I said. "Elena Rivers." Her mouth did not move. The light behind her did. "I won't ask a house to keep me," I said, and my voice came from a place lower than fear, older than anger. "I won't be the next woman in glass." I lifted the metal flashlight, the ugly heavy thing Thomas had hidden, the thing made for breaking, and brought it up, and for a heartbeat I saw my whole life in the quick of the crack. The kitchen towels lined in neat rows, the coffee gone cold out of kindness, The conferences where men asked my husband how he learned to write women who bled. Then I swung. The mirror split with a scream like winter breaking and a shatter like rain. Light leapt. A sound, a pressure, a smell of old lavender blown out. The glass fell around my shoes in a glittering, harmless storm. The white figure disappeared the way a held breath disappears when you finally decide not to drown. Silence came down hard and then lifted. The officers stared. The imposter's face flickered between triumph and loss and found neither. Thomas shut his eyes like a man taking a blow he'd owed the world a long time. I set the flashlight down gently and turned to Callahan. "Take him," I said, nodding at the imposter. "And take him too," I added, nodding at my husband. "One of them is a thief, the other made theft a home." Callahan didn't pretend to understand the theology of what had just happened. He didn't need to. He signaled. Metal clicked. The imposter bowed his head, relief and fury battling in the shadows of his mouth. Thomas did not resist when the cuffs bit. He looked at me. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't deserve it, and I didn't have it to give. "Publish them," he said instead, and the plea in it was something like love finally telling the truth. "I will," I said. They led both men away into the bright, ordinary noise of law. Callahan paused at the threshold. "You should come with us, Mrs. Caldwell," he said gently. "In a minute," I said. He nodded and went. I was alone with the manuscripts and the broken mirror and an attic that smelled less like keeping and more like air. I gathered the pages and held them against my chest. Through the window, Savannah's afternoon burned soft and gold. Somewhere down the street, a woman laughed the old-fashioned way. With her whole life. I found the ribbon in the box and tied it around the stack the way a person ties a gift they intend to give back. On the top page I wrote in a hand that didn't shake, "By Elena Rivers." Downstairs, the front door opened to the serious choreography of justice. Footsteps receded. Radios murmured. The house listened, then let go. I carried the work to the landing. Halfway down the stairs, I stopped and looked back. The mirror frame hung empty, a dark doorway that led nowhere anymore. "Thank you," I said. Not to a ghost, not to a curse, but to a room that had learned how to release what it had taken. For the first time since the rain began, I opened a window. The curtain breathed. The house exhaled. On the kitchen table, I placed the manuscript and my phone. I called the number I knew by heart and had avoided like a sin. My mother's. When she answered, I told her a story that would change her daughter's name in her mouth and her son-in-law's name in her prayers. Then I called Callahan's office and the only publisher who still returned calls on Sundays. "This is Margaret Caldwell," I said, when a startled assistant picked up. "I have a book for you. It belongs to a woman who has been waiting a very long time." "Who is the author?" the assistant asked. I looked at the sunlight on the paper. I looked at my hands. I looked down the hall where dust now behaved itself like dust. "Elena Rivers," I said. "Spell it right." I hung up and stood very still, listening to a house that had finally given up its secret, to my own breathing, to the quiet you earn and don't inherit. When the clock in the hallway struck the hour, it sounded like a clean thing. I poured a glass of water. I drank it. I wiped my face with both palms, the way a person returns to herself. Then I sat down and began to write a letter I should have written years ago. "Elena, you are not kept anymore." Outside, the rain had passed. The day went on with its ordinary errands. Somewhere in Savannah, a bookshop was closing its door with the bell that rings like tiny forgiveness. In this house, in this room, in this name, light arrived as if it had been waiting for me to ask. I did not look back at the empty frame when I turned the lock and left. There was nothing left to see there but the truth.